bring this out and make this clear, but I would be remiss if I want to talk about who, if I don't speak about this aspect, this feminine aspect of the teaching. Now, what do we mean when we say, who was Fatima? So, Fatima, you read there's a couple of books and there's lots of little papers about her, and most of them are sentimental. Because, she's the daughter of the Prophet, and she's the alayha, and she's the wife of Ali, and but who is she? Right? So here's this girl, 5 years old, and suddenly her father becomes a prophet. Of course, he's always been a prophet, but suddenly he's the prophet of Allah in that time and the end of all of the prophets, right? And he goes onto this mountain of light, Mount of Nur, and an angel comes, and it's been his custom. We've grown up with him, and he does this fasting thing every year, and he does this. We know this about him, but suddenly an angel has appeared to your father, and this angel has told him, Ikra. Ikra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. Read in the name of your Lord who created you from a speck, a drop, right? Read and Ikra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq al-insana min alaq. Ikra wa rabbuka al-akram. Read, and your Lord is most gracious, who taught the human being by the pen what they did not know. So suddenly this man, who is for all accounts, as many people in those days were, unlettered, right, not particularly literate, suddenly is reading from a heavenly book and is living in a town which is a nexus for a caravan route, and it's a pretty rough and ready town on many different levels, and it's kind of like, you imagine, somebody getting a message in Las Vegas. People used to go around, they used to go around the Haram naked. And licentiousness was everywhere. Drunkenness was everywhere. A lot of things, warfare and raiding and all these things were going on. And here's this guy, and he comes and he starts talking about Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim, mercy and compassion, and all that goes with that in the midst of this rather savage environment. And that's why I say, at the end of all of those years that he was in Mecca, he only had 170 followers, because it's difficult to convince people who are into getting drunk and going out and, womanizing and, running around naked and, all of those things, to come to a different way of being, a very, very different way of being. It's not an easy chore. And the authorities are making money off of that, you can believe that. So they're not particularly, even though he's coming from a good family and everything like that, trading family, they're not so keen on, actually at one point they offer him to make him to be the king if you just shut up. Whatever you want, Muhammad will give it to you, but just stop this talk. We don't want to hear any more of this talk, right? Because it threatens their business interests, just at a simple level. Because things will not go on the same. If his message gets to be in everybody's heart and mind, things are not going to be the same. They're simply not going to be the same. But he goes on and he does that, and he has this daughter, little daughter, 5 years old. And she loves her father. She has 3 older sisters, married or in the process of being, and she's pretty much alone with her Baba, her father, her Abi. And she loves him like anything. He is the greatest. The way sometimes, you know, there's girls in the family. I have a lot of children. I know there's certain, you know, girls, they more for the mom and some are more for the dad and like and so on and so on. This girl, you know, the youngest girl, I have a daughter very much like that called Zainab. She loves her Baba. She used to run along and hold my finger and try to keep up with me and like that, you know, and she was so happy to go out with her father. Right? This happens, right? So here's this girl who completely accepts what he's doing. With all of her heart, she accepts. She doesn't find anything strange in what he's doing. And all that he says goes right into her heart. And it becomes who she is. She is his. What he talks about and everything, as she grows, you know, and people, of course, in those days, you know, they matured earlier than they mature now. You know, there's not this long extended, you know, childhood that goes into teenage or teeny boppers and then teenagers and then on, all this stuff. You know, people grew up in a little bit more of a hurry in those days, right? So here's this girl and she does that. And in the meantime, the people are treating him like garbage. When he goes to pray, they go to the place where they kill the animals and they get the guts from the inside of the sheep and the guts from the inside of the camels and they put him on his back and they do everything to put him down. And this little girl, maybe 7 or 8 or 9 years old at this point, cleans the guts off her father's back. They throw stones at him. She tries to help him. This is what she does. She loves her Baba. And she will do anything for him. And at the same time, she has her nature because all children, if you have a lot of children, they're all coming from the same, basically, source, you see that they're very different. They're not all the same. If you have a number of children, there's differences in the children, and they're all coming from the same mom and dad, but they're different, they have different feel to them, a different taste to them, a different thing to them. And her thing is that she is, you remember, I told you, she is the most generous of people, first of all. Remember, I told you on her wedding night, somebody comes to the door, a girl, and she has nothing nice to wear. You know, it's a big party. This is a big guy in town, and you know, there's a big party and everything like that, wedding party. And she wants to look nice. She wants to look pretty. She wants to have something nice to wear, and she's poor and she doesn't have anything to wear. So Fatimah takes off her wedding dress and gives it to the girl. And wears what she had. Well, Jibril sends another wedding dress down for her. That's another story. But nevertheless, she doesn't know that Jibril's going to send her down a wedding dress. She gives away the best of what she has. This is Fatimah. This is who she was. This is the kind of thing people would come to the door later on in life and ask, and you know, they lived very poor. You know, when the people went, you know, to Medina, you know, they left everything behind. You know, people who came to Medina from Mecca, the first Muslims, were very, very poor people. Like in time, things picked up and things improved, but they had nothing. Imagine you leave your home and you go someplace else, and you got to leave by night or like that and sneak out and like that. It's not as exactly that you can take, you know, your living room suite with you, you know. I mean, you can't do that. And there's no pickup trucks in those days or anything like that. So you can't, what are you going to put it on, the camel? You know, I mean, so people went into the Hijrah, you know, as very, very poor people. The Muslims were very poor people for the very early ages and time in Medina, and it was only as time passed that they became, you know, established and so on and so forth like that, because Medina was an agricultural town, unlike Mecca, and so had a source of revenue and, you know, things that could happen. a different source of revenue, right? In a more internal source of revenue, not dependent on outside, but upon its own internal, things. So this was Fatima, and then the people got so mad at the Prophet ﷺ that they kicked him out of town. They embargoed him. We're very well aware in our present day of embargoes. They embargoed the Prophet, and they drove him up this valley. And they cut off all economic ties with him. The only thing that sustained them through that period of time, or the main thing that sustained them during that period of time financially, was his wife, Lady Khadija, radiallahu ta'ala anha, who was, first of all, when he married her, a very wealthy woman, and second of all, continued to be a wealthy woman, because she was a very smart businesswoman, and she spent her entire fortune. And he had an uncle, Abu Talib, radiallahu ta'ala an, and he gave support from the very beginning. He was the father of Ali, by the way, who gave support all through his life to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And in 1 year, they both died. They both died. How bad were things? Things were so bad that like what it's like fasting all day. People fasted 3 days at a time. There was nothing. There was no iftar. There was no suhoor for 3 days in a row sometimes. No breakfast, no dinner. People used to tie rocks on their stomachs with pieces of cloth so that you might think that they had something in their stomachs. It was really tough times. And finally, Khadija became very ill and she died. And Khadija. Excuse me. Khadija became very ill and she died. And also his uncle died. And Fatima herself became very sick because it was really tough times. So this is the situation. And in this time, there are these people, they're living in finally, they lift this thing, but they're still out to get him, and he leaves and he goes to his mother's city of Yathrib and begins another life. And during this time, Fatima, who has been living all the time in the house with his cousin Ali, they get married. And in time they produce children. Hassan, Hussein, Zainab, and Kulthum, who dies fairly early on, leaving really only Hassan, Hussein, and Zainab. I've written some things about Zainab. You can read about her. She was a lion, mashallah, as a woman. She was a very strong woman. But during this time, the Prophet said this thing, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, about his daughter, who by then is a grown woman and a mother of children and so on and so forth. Because no longer is Khadija alive to look after. Fatima is looking after the whole household, basically, at that point. He says, she is the mother of her father. Listen carefully. Let this go deep into you. She is the mother of her father. Who is her father? Who is the Prophet? Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Khatam al-Anbiya, the seal of all prophecy, Khairul Khalqullah, the best of Allah's creation. She is his mother. Listen to what he's saying. She is my mother. And what does he say about the mother? The mother, the mother, the mother. Who is the teacher, the first teacher that all children know? Who? The mother. Okay? Listen carefully. There's a great secret that's contained in this. So the Prophet of Allah, his teacher is his mother, and she is now his mother. And she is, in effect, his teacher. Understand this is a very deep understanding, if you understand it. And she's married to his cousin, who is arguably the first male who's accepted Islam. From the very beginning, when he was young, he had a big dinner for all of his family, and a coming out party. And he's going to tell them, I'm the Prophet. They all look at him like he's a jerk. You know, what? Hey, you're Muhammad. I mean, we know who you are. I mean, you're Ameen, you're truthful, you're honest, you're the Prophet of Allah. I mean, whoa. You know, this is a far stretch. Then he asked, well, who's with me? Who's going to stand with me? This little boy gets up like this, Muhammad back here, young boy, even younger than him, I think at that time, he was 11. How old are you, son?
12.
A year younger than this boy here. He gets up and he said, I'm with Muhammad. He is the Prophet. And everybody laughs. A kid is a kid. Right? There's big guys around like that. There's, you know, all these, you know, the uncles and all the people in the family like that. They're looking at him like he's a jerk. But the young boy is saying, I'm with you. So from the very beginning of this mission, this young boy is with it. He's with it. And he grows up in the house with the Prophet ﷺ, which means what? When you grow up in somebody's house, there are no lies. Like I can go out on the street and I can appear a certain way. You might think I'm a really nice guy. You might think that I'm this. You might think that I'm that. But if you live with me, you know, I yell from time to time. And I do various things like this, but you don't see that. You see it.
Yes,
Do you? I don't yell very much. I appear to be, but I mean, in other words, when you live with somebody, you know that person, the whole of that person. There's not much, and the houses are not exactly palaces. There's very small houses. Everybody's living cheek by jowl. So everybody knows everybody very well. So this young man, who's grown up in his house, he knows everything about the Prophet ﷺ. He knows when he gets revelations, what he says about it. He knows his doubts about it, because he had doubts about it very often. About like, where is this coming from and what is it? There were periods when nothing would come for a long period of time. All of this, his own doubts about, is it maybe somebody's playing with me? Maybe it's a jinn, what it is, I don't know, and like this. All of these things, he hears that, and he's talking with his wife, Khadija, radiallahu ta'ala anha. He's talking with her about what's going on and everything like that. This little boy, this young man, to be, hears all of that, right? And he's living in the house along with, some other people who are living in the house also. All of these things are going into him like this. And then there comes to him, after Khadija dies, there comes to him, his best friend said, I'll marry her. And Abu Bakr, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, doesn't accept that. Then his strong right man, strong right arm, Umar, because when Umar became a Muslim, originally he was out to kill the Prophet, but when he became a Muslim, he became the guy the go-to guy that everybody goes to protect him, because he's like, he says, there were two guys called Umar in Mecca at that time. He says, he asked Allah, give me one of the Umarain, give me one of these guys, because they were really strong men. So he had somebody, you know, and Fatima didn't have to be the only one who was out there. You know, nobody dared to do that after a while, to throw guts on the back of the Prophet when he was praying, because they knew they're going to have to deal with Umar. Right? So, and he comes and asks. He says he doesn't accept. And finally, he gives her in marriage to his cousin, who the only job that his cousin really had, Ali had, was he was what's called a hamala. Hamal means somebody who carries things. He was a guy who used to take ropes and he would carry people's loads from one place to another. And he had a further thing in it, that he, because Medina was a large Jewish population, he only worked for Jews. He wouldn't work for the Muslims. What? Why didn't you work for the Muslims? They asked him, why don't you work for us? Why don't you carry? Because he said, you might give me more than I was with, because I'm living in the house of the Prophet. Maybe you want to get some influence. Maybe you want to get something from me. But he said, I know the Jew is only going to pay me exactly what I'm worth, no more and no less. And he's going to argue with me and haggle with me about the price. And so, you know, whatever I get will be an honest thing for having carried this load. So I'm only going to work for them, because there's a large contingency of Jews living there, because they knew that a prophet was coming. It was in their revelation. They knew that that was going to happen. They just didn't understand exactly how it was going to happen, and they weren't happy with how it happened. But nevertheless, because they thought it would be from